What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Pro Football Focus Show here on RotoGrinders for Week 9. We've got the whole crew here. Britt Devine here. We've got Tyler Beaker. We've got Scott Barrett. Scott, big breaking news. Deshaun Watson goes down. Non-contact injury. Just throwing a pitch in practice today. It's practice, man. How bad is this for the Texans?
This is absolutely brutal, worst case scenario. DeAndre Hopkins leads all wide receivers in fantasy points per game, and Will Fuller ranks second. That's absurd. Watson has the most fantasy points of any quarterback through the first 7 games of their career, and the 10th most of any quarterback in any season of their career through their first 7 games of that season. Tom Savage, I am of the
Tom
opinion.
Savage.
I am of the opinion that he is a very below average in quarterback in terms of backup quarterbacks, even just a below. So not good. This is atrocious for everyone. Indianapolis defense on every DFS lineup on every site.
It's interesting. I haven't considered that. I haven't gotten that desperate yet, Scott. There's a couple of defenses I like.
I mean, yeah, I like the Rams and some others, but Eagles, but so the highest graded game of Tom Savage's career came in week 1 of the season when he threw 7 completions, which was only one more time than he was sacked, which was 6.
He had negative FanDuel points that week as well.
Right.
Not good. Tyler, what's your thought on this? The city of Houston wins the World Series last night, and now the football team, they've already had a bunch of injuries, but now absolutely crippled. I think it's sad to see a young guy, and you can really root for him too. His story's great. A lot of people pre-draft were talking about, hey, his arm, he can't throw 50 miles an hour, but it doesn't really seem to matter. Just kind of sad for him. A really good guy you can root for, it seems like.
Yeah, Houston fans have run that entire gamut of emotions from World Series win to losing their starting quarterback. I feel for them. That last week's Sunday game against the Seahawks, that was one of the most entertaining games I've seen in a while. It's just a shame that it's happened, and we get to watch Tom Savage going forward.
Yeah,
I wish they could get Colin Kaepernick.
There's not a chance.
There's not a chance
for in Houston for sure. Here, Matt McGloin might be starting within a week or two, so I think they signed him as a backup. But enough Texan stuff. We'll talk about that maybe on a couple players as we get through here. Let's get to Thursday night analysis. A pretty interesting game here, Scott. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, you have to talk about the Jets here first. So, what can we expect from them? McCown hasn't looked bad all season long. The Buffalo pass defense, pretty reasonable. Maybe a couple big play wide receivers. It's hit or miss at running back here. Do you see anything useful for tonight?
Right. So Buffalo's being passed on 65% of the time this season. That's the second highest rate in the league. McCown has been surprisingly efficient, ranking 7th among quarterbacks in fantasy points per game over the previous 4 weeks of the season. But Buffalo ranks 6th best against expectation to opposing quarterbacks. So I'm not paying him, although it's kind of rough looking for a cheap quarterback this week. Matt Forte is cheap as well, and he has 20 carries and 20 targets over his prior 3 weeks, but it's still a low upside committee in a tough matchup. Buffalo does rank 7th worst against expectation to opposing tight ends, and Austin Seferian-Jenkins has 39 targets and 3 touchdowns in his last 4 games. He's my number 6 tight end in my rankings this week, and he's about at value as the 5th or 6th highest priced tight end this week on both slates. Robbie Anderson is way too cheap and has a stranglehold on this wide receiving core of late, with 10 more targets and 22 more fantasy points than the next closest wide receiver over the past 4 weeks, I believe. He should also get a target boost if Jeremy Curley's out. Is he out? I'm not.
I haven't seen anything on that yet. We got who is it? Kelvin Benjamin's not playing, but I haven't seen anything cross the wire on Curley yet.
He's supposed to be suspended, but I'm not sure his status right now. But the matchup's not amazing for Anderson. Bills are above average in fantasy points per game on deep targets. They're above average against expectation. He's a fine play at the end of the day, but it's still what should be, I know we've said this before, but a really ugly game for both offenses.
I hope not. There's one guy, and Tyler's going to talk about him here in a second. ASJ2, there's guys, I'm looking at DraftKings, priced right above him, priced right below him, that I'm much more interested in tonight. There's basically one guy I want tonight And Tyler, we're going to talk about him. It's LeSean McCoy, massive opportunity. Now, he's been a big home favorite for the past couple of games. That's typically when he has a good game. Here he's on the road. He still is a favorite here. Easily my favorite play. I think on my FanDuel cash teams, I might actually use him on the Thursday slate. And I'm usually a guy that likes to fade the Thursday game.
Yeah, I think he's a very strong cash game play this week. He is a 3-point road favorite, as you just referenced. But McCoy's just been crushing it in terms of volume. He's seen 50 rush attempts over his last 2 games, 7 targets in each one. He's finally on the winning side of variance. McCoy has scored all 3 of his touchdowns in the last 2 weeks. The Jets' 3.4 red zone trips allowed per game to opposing offenses is tied for the top 5 most in the league. So we're going to see McCoy have plenty of chances to score again in this game. And I think we could see him hit 3 straight weeks of touchdown production. I also think there's a pretty good chance for him breaking a long run like we saw last week with him. The Jets have allowed the 4th most run plays of 10-plus yards. Quick shout out here to the PFF game preview staff for this nugget. Safety Jamal Adams has spent 84.1% of his snaps within 8 yards of the line of scrimmage. That's 9th highest rate among all safeties. He also has the 3rd most missed tackles at his position. So I think we have a really good shot at seeing Shady break off a similar run like we saw last week with his 48-yard touchdown run, where he's still got the wheels to take it to the house.
Is there any stat you guys don't have access to at Pro Football Focus? You got this distance, you got the yards, you've got missed tackles, or anything you guys don't have there behind? Like you guys even have some of the super advanced stuff that even like I don't look at. It's just absolutely crazy. Some of the guys.
Yeah, the limit does not exist. We just have endless stats. And I really agree with you that he's a great cash game play. I think I'd rather pay up for McCoy over Leonard Fournette, who's similarly priced, but McCoy has that receiving upside that we covet in our cash game plays. Moving along in this game, I really like Tyrod here. On the road, he hasn't been a profitable move. He's averaging just 11 DraftKings points compared to 18.6 at home. This is also the 2nd time that the Jets have seen Tyrod. They played each other in week 1, and it's historically been wise to fade the second matchup between divisional opponents as the games typically are closer and the fantasy performers tend to do less than expectation. However, this is a really good matchup for Tyrod. The Jets are allowing the most passing touchdowns, and I kind of want to get some exposure here. Muhammad Wilkerson and Mo Claiborne are both likely to be out. Things should just open up even more for Tyrod tonight. And the Jets have allowed multiple passing touchdowns in 6 of 8 games, allowing 4 different quarterbacks to also rush for 30 yards or more. Well, Kaiser was 29, but I'm just going to keep it at 30 for the sake of brevity. But I really think Tyrod's rushing upside, particularly against a defense here like Todd Bowles, where they play heavy man, could be on full display tonight, where we see Tyrod bust off a big gain on the ground.
What about the passing game here? You want to take a shot? There's no Kelvin Benjamin. I'm looking around for Jets inactives too. I still haven't seen that cross Twitter. As soon as that happens, I'll pop in on it. But anything, I don't know if I really want him. I tried some. Who did he played so bad for me last week. I already forgot his name. But I'm basically not interested in any wide receiver target.
I had some Andre Holmes dart throws, and I got lucky with the touchdown bailout. But I'm fading this entire wide receiver group. Like you said, no Kelvin Benjamin, and there's really not enough volume going to any particular player to warrant any kind of rostering outside of some dart throws if you really want to. The tight end, I'm just going to avoid the T-Rex arms of Nick O'Leary. You can chase if you want. I'm just going to fade. Yeah, and the defense, it's hard to play a defense against the almighty Josh McCown. He's
like the 8th or 9th best fantasy quarterback this season. I guess that speaks to how many injuries we have at the position. But McCown just seems to get it done. I used him in cash 1 week, barely squeaked by with value, and he was like minimum price. I don't think I'm going to mess around with that too much. Scott, real quick, favorite play in this game, not named LeSean McCoy.
It's LeSean McCoy.
LeSean McCoy, yeah, I would agree. Trick question.
Right. ASJ though, probably. Sorry.
All right, let's go to quarterback. And I don't know if either one of you guys had Deshaun Watson in, but unfortunately, if you did, you guys had extra work to do. So we're not going to be using Deshaun Watson at all. Real quick, is Tom Savage? Can't play him, right? Even though he's in like a really good spot theoretically. No Scott, no Tom Savage this week at near minimum price.
I've heard a few people talk about playing him and Indianapolis defense, but loyal Power Hour podcast listeners know why I will never touch him and why I will always play the opposing defense. And that's all I'll say.
All right. So let's get to your stud quarterback. He's missing his star running back. and you think this is going to allow him to pass more as one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the league. This is Dak Prescott in a huge total game at home. I agree with you. I think Des Bryant as well. Maybe we'll talk about him in a little bit as well here. But give me some love for Mr. Dak Prescott this week.
Right. Well, the main thing is stacking with Des Bryant, who I'm going to have like near 100% exposure to, because
so is everybody.
Exactly. Yeah, he's playing at home. The cool stat I found was that Prescott leads all quarterbacks in fantasy points per dropback over the past 2 seasons. If he dropped back the same amount as Tom Brady, he'd have 44 more fantasy points, or 2.2 fantasy points per game more. That's incredible. I do think he drops back more this week. I know the more you're dropping back, the less efficient you're going to be. But of course, it's a fall far from the most efficient quarterback in the league. Plus, he's only behind Tyrod Taylor in terms of rushing fantasy points per dropback. Could start racking up some more points on the ground. Again, Zeke out, so efficiency could hurt there. I do still think this is a run-first offense, but it's the highest over-under. It's a close-scoring shootout. Kansas City's defense allowing the 9th most fantasy points per game, but they're surrendering 2 of the 11 highest quarterback games of the year, while Dak Prescott owns the 12th and 13th highest scoring games. Could we get him at low ownership after disappointing last week? No,
not with this Watson news.
Right. But he's still definitely mispriced, and he's great.
One other thing I like too, I believe Kansas City plays a lot of man. That allows the quarterback to run a little bit more too. So that's a little bit of upside in there for Dak. So I do like Dak. I do want to note Jets inactives have come out, Tyler and Scott. Mo Claiborne, Terrence Brooks out on the defense. Does that change anything for you, Scott?
I'm sorry, I missed everything you just said.
Mo Claiborne, Terrence Brooks out for the Jets on defense this week. Does that change anything for you?
Is Screen playing? Screen's probably out too, right?
That has not. Maybe there's more. Those are the 2 guys I see that are inactive that popped up on my Twitter right now. So
yeah, I mean that's a boost for the Bills receivers, but like Tyler said, it's gross.
Let's see here. Screen is back. He is playing tonight. So let's go, Tyler, your stud quarterback. And this is a guy, he's at home. And I don't know, this is really interesting. When I've seen some hot takes at some other positions, but I can really get on board with this. It's Drew Brees at home. The passing game's working really well. And I think this kind of plays into a little bit of a hot take I think Scott might talk about at the running back position here. He basically thinks the pass game here is going to reign supreme. Tampa Bay, horrific. What do you got for me?
Yeah, it's really weird with the Saints this year. Everyone's getting frustrated with Drew Brees due to his lack of volume, and it's really just come down to play calling. The Saints currently rank 56.5%. I'm sorry, the Saints currently rank 20th in their pass play percentage at 56.5%. The last time they weren't top 7 in pass play percentage was 2009. Their offense has completely changed their identity, and a lot of it has to do with how well Mark Ingram's been playing. He's just been a volume hog and getting touch after touch. But I think this Bucs defense could be a good cure-all for Brees. They're 31st in pass DVOA. They've allowed either 300 passing yards or multiple passing touchdowns in 5 of 7 games. The Bucs rank top 6 in most passing yards allowed, top 6 in highest yards per attempt, and only the Browns have allowed more top 6 fantasy outings to opposing QBs than the Buccaneers defense. It's a lot of 6s. They are the only defense without double-digit sacks, and the Saints' offensive line has had the 3rd fewest QB hits allowed. That's going to give Brees plenty of time to dissect this defense that's just been plagued with injuries in the secondary. Brees at home is a trend that we banged the drum for several years now, and I'm just going to keep doing it. If people want to fade, that's on them. I'm going to keep playing good plays at home.
Yeah, let me see if Brent Grimes, I forgot to look at his status today. So let's see here. Brent Grimes did not practice today as well either. So that's another little boost there for the Saints passing game. Value, there is some value. I did a premium show today with Head Chopper, a guy here at RotoGrinders. And he thought I was crazy for mentioning Jacoby Brissett as a value quarterback, because you got to do, if you want stud running backs and good receivers this week, you got to do some funky things. And I was thinking about the game script. They were going to be all behind because Watson was going to go nuts here. So what do we think here, Scott? How does Brissett, does his value increase? Does it decrease? These are all things I'm trying to put together in my head with this Watson news.
Yeah, so I liked him a lot more when Watson was active. Opposing quarterbacks have one of the highest correlations in all of DFS. With him being out, I'm definitely less excited. It's a soft matchup against the Texans defense, ranking 6th worst in fantasy points per game to quarterbacks over expectation. Kind of surprisingly, he ranks 14th among quarterbacks in fantasy points per game since week 3. But a big reason why the Texans were allowing all these fantasy points is because, they were racking up all these points on offense. So the opposing team had a lot of garbage time. I'm definitely off this now. I'm pretty much just paying up for quarterbacks this week because I see a lot of gross value plays.
Yeah, and you got to imagine too, the Watson-led offense, they were kind of playing pretty fast. You got to expect it slows down a little bit with Savage, less plays. What I was keying in on, the Texans, they've allowed at least 29 points in 5 of their 7 games so far this year. This defense just isn't doing really good here. I still like Brissett. Like you, I liked him a little bit more when it was possibly a shootout potential here. I'm going to have to reevaluate with this Watson news a little bit. Tyler, you're talking about a value quarterback who could possibly be the MVP with all these injuries going on right now. He's facing what theoretically is a tough defense, but it's not as tough as you probably think it is. This is Carson Wentz. It's the Eagles. They're at home against Brock Osweiler, who's no doubt going to turn the ball over a couple of times for some short fields and easy scores. And I don't think a lot of people are going to be on Wentz this week.
Yeah, I love rostering top players at cheap prices just because of projected matchups. Carson Wentz leads all quarterbacks in DraftKings scoring so far this year. Denver's defense, their strength is in their corners. Philadelphia should have no problems running empty routes here against Bradley Roby, Keep Talib with Alshon and Torrey. I think they're just going to be out there as decoys while they let Aguilar and Ertz run across the middle. Ertz is going to be in for a big game. I think he's going to be the smash play at tight end, well worth paying up for, and the rare week where I actually might want to try to pay up at tight end in cash games because of it. I don't know if Carson Wentz will hit the 300-yard bonus here, but I really think multiple touchdowns are well within his range of outcomes. Over half of the opposing quarterbacks that have played the Broncos have thrown for 2 or more touchdowns against them. The Eagles are currently 7.5-point home favorites, and I think Wentz has a great chance of going well under-owned in this game.
Yeah, I love Philly's defense is one of my top plays of the week too. And I like when I see Brock Osweiler starting on the road in Philadelphia, I see a couple of turnovers, maybe a couple easy gimme touchdowns for the offense this week. I think Carson Wentz, an absolute screaming value. What is he, 6,100 on DraftKings? Let me pull this up here. That's him, Matt Stafford, Marcus Mariota, Matt Ryan. I know Matt Ryan could possibly have a good game, but I'll take Wentz there for sure out of all those guys. Scott, you're dud. I don't know. Are you cheating here? I feel like you're taking the easy way out here. You're not going to play Andy Dalton against Jacksonville. Come on. I think you're crazy.
Right. No one's on Andy Dalton this week. He was chalk last week. But I do have a good stat for you guys. Jacksonville's leading the league with an opposing passer rating of 61.6 on 234 attempts. The last time a quarterback had as many attempts and a worse passer rating was Jimmy Clausen in 2010, who's terrible.
Yeah, those were the days. Jimmy Clausen, a quarterback. What a horrible experience that was. Dud for you, Tyler. You got 2 guys. You're basically saying, hey, this San Francisco-Arizona game is going to be so ugly. These guys have maybe a shot at 1 touchdown, but possibly they could both leave the game with none. Basically a complete fade of the quarterback situation here.
Yeah, I'm not really into this game whatsoever. I think it's going to be a complete snooze fest. Both these teams are going to turn in pretty run-heavy performances. I think we could see Bethard also without his top receiving options in Pierre Garçon and Marquise Goodwin, who've been banged up this week. Adrian Peterson should be running against the San Francisco front 4 that has lost Arik Armstead and Solomon Thomas over the last few weeks. It has the lowest total of the week, and it's just not really a place where we typically want to invest in DFS. This is just an easy fade for me.
Colin Kaepernick, not an NFL quarterback, but Drew Stanton and CJ Beathard. We don't really know on Beathard. It's early in his career, but it doesn't look like it's really panning out for him too much. So let's go wrap it up for some quarterbacks. We're going to talk some high-priced running backs with Mr. Scott Barrett and some dank stats. So let's talk about Todd Gurley. I like him quite a bit. Your dud when we get to this is going to be one of the highest owned running backs of the week. So you're really going to have to back it up. Someone I was eyeing quite a bit here. But you seem to like Gurley. So what's going on with him against the Giants who, I don't know. I just don't think the Giants are very good as a team right now.
Right. They do have a bye week to prepare, but yeah, I think Gurley just smashes. I think the Rams defense just smashes. He ranks first among all players on the main slate in both fantasy points per game and expected fantasy points per game. Even in a 33-0 rout in their last game, Gurley still saw 8 targets. Even in a 37-point victory in week 1, he still saw 6 targets. Easy stack with the Rams defense, which are a run funnel defense. They're performing very well against the pass, where they rank 6th best, but they're 28th in opposing yards per carry allowed. Why is that significant? The Giants have no passing game to speak of, losing Odell Beckham Jr., Brandon Marshall. But even worse is their running game. So I can see a lot of turnovers in this game. Todd Gurley plus Los Angeles Rams all day.
Yeah, it's really tough. Gurley, Hunt, Fournette. I think a lot of people are going to use Ingram. Scott might argue against that when we get to his dud section here. Tyler, you want to talk about Kareem Hunt? I think Fournette, off a bye, a little bit rested, is also in play. It's really tough at the top if you're deciding who to use, but why do you like Kareem Hunt so much?
Well, I had to arm wrestle Scott for this take because he loves Kareem Hunt so much. But I agree with Scott that Todd Gurley should be the lock. I think he's the number one guy that we want based on volume, rushing and receiving. But I also think that Kareem Hunt is right behind him. He's averaging 21.8 touches per game, 22.8 fantasy points per game. Dallas has been fairly middling in statistics allowed, but a lot of that is due to a lack of volume against. Dallas has given up the 5th fewest touches per game to opposing running backs, but that's a lot due to opposing play calling. Opponents are throwing against them 63.3% of the time. That's the 3rd highest rate in the league. Lucky for Hunt, he ranks 3rd on the team in targets, and 2 of his 6 scores have come via receptions. So I think he has a great chance of picking up some fantasy points that way. This game is just the one that I want to load up on in GPPs. Like, it has shootout potential. It's a near pick'em, and I think we should see a ton of scoring on both sides. My not so bold call of the week is that Hunt beats variance and returns to the end zone this week, putting up a 30 burger in the process.
Always have to worry about Andy Reid play calling, though. That's the one problem with Kareem Hunt. I do want to note
Tyreek Hill red zone throws.
Dallas 20th in DVOA against running backs out of the backfield. That bodes well for Hunt as well. I think it's fine. It's really tough at the top. I like Gurley. I like Hunt. I like Fournette. I like Ingram. Scott's going to disagree with me in a little bit here. But Scott, before we trash Ingram, let's talk about Mr. Run CMC, who I might argue a little bit. I know you're going to have some things, but he played his fewest snaps of the season last year. They talked about getting Cameron Artis-Payne some extra touches, and I believe CMC only played 58% of the snaps compared to 74% of the snaps each of the 2 previous weeks. Are you scared of Cameron Artis-Payne?
No, definitely not. He saw 1 target. That's not really eating into McCaffrey's monstrous workload too much. I've waited since April for this week. It is officially Derry Sanders week. From now and henceforth, Christian McCaffrey will only ever be referred to as Derry Sanders. Everything's coming together. Carolina traded Kelvin Benjamin just so I can have Derry Sanders week. So in week 3, when Benjamin played only 7 snaps, Christian McCaffrey saw 11 targets. Kelvin Benjamin leads behind a 19.9% target market share. That should mean even more targets for McCaffrey, who already absurdly ranks 8th among all players in target market share, 14th in expected fantasy points per game. He's in a dream matchup. He's up against an Atlanta Falcons defense who, over the past 2 regular seasons, which doesn't include James White's near Super Bowl MVP winning performance against them, they're allowing the most receiving fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. Who's the best receiving running back in the game? That's Christian McCaffrey. Sorry, Chris Thompson.
Is he even a running back?
Right, exactly. So Atlanta is also allowing the 4th most fantasy points per game to receivers on short passes and passes behind the line of scrimmage this year. That's where McCaffrey has scored 90% of his total fantasy points. He's my RB9 and half-point PPR leagues. He's the 21st highest priced running back on FanDuel. Derry Sanders week, don't look back.
Yeah, I do like CMC, just the target. If I give you over under, I don't know, 10.5 targets, you go take the over on that this week?
It sounds about right.
I think that's a pretty good line if you're in Vegas betting on it. So I do like CMC quite a bit. Your value running back, Tyler. Let's see who you got here. I don't know if this was pre-Deshaun Watson news. I actually had Lamar Miller penciled into my shell cash game teams on both FanDuel and DraftKings, currently reevaluating that curve for Sunday. How do you see this playing out? Maybe he gets even more heavily involved now simply because you don't have Watson chucking the ball up and down the field now.
Yeah, I need to do some reevaluating as well. I mean, I thought Miller was such a great play. He's like priced right in the middle between the punt plays and the studs. I thought he was a great way to build sound lineups. Now I'm not really sure.
300 more on DK. You can go to McCaffrey. I think Scott's got a pretty good idea there.
Yeah, this game is like, we have to evaluate it on the fly right here. So it opened as a 50-point game total. The Texans were 13-point home favorites. Now they're down to just, I think, 6 or 7. Over the last couple hours, it's already gone down a full touchdown.
I thought Watson was worth more than a touchdown, in my opinion. Like,
I'm surprised it's
to,
only
to Tom Savage, only a touchdown. I thought that was more.
Yeah, this could become a pick 'em by the time it actually kicks off. But one thing that does bode well in Lamar Miller's favor is that the Colts are allowing the most rushing touchdowns and the most fantasy points on DraftKings to opposing running backs. Miller has at least 15 touches in every game. He's coming off a season high in both snap percentage at 87.3 and touches with 24. I think he's got a pretty safe floor in this one, despite the quarterback inefficiencies we may see come Sunday.
Yeah, they basically told Foreman in this close shootout game, just stay on the bench. We don't need you. We're going to let Miller. And this game probably a lot closer than most people think. I think Miller's got a pretty good stranglehold on the touches. I'm going to reevaluate my process and look at touches and game flow as the weekend progresses. But for right now, I think I've tentatively taken him out of my shell cash teams. Scott, let's talk about Mark Ingram here, because you've got him as your dud, and I think this is you've got pretty sound reasoning here. You've got I think it's a pretty big hot take, though. I looked at our projected ownerships from Jamino, and he's going to be like the first or second highest owned running back on the week after getting 24 opportunities last week, 27 opportunities the week before, and 30 opportunities the week before that. We've basically been talking up Ingram every single week, and it looks like you have some reasoning why you don't want to use them. So spell it out for everybody.
Right. So I'm the stats guy, but for once I have a little bit of narrative street for you. If we only look at price and recent volume, Ingram is a much better play than Alvin Kamara by a landslide almost even. But here's my reasoning. Ingram is going to be super highly owned, but I don't think people are factoring in the legitimate risk of him seeing a decreased workload due to recent fumbling issues. Here's what I have written up. So Ingram is now one of the 6 highest priced running backs on both sites. Very good reason for being so. I've been calling him a mid-range RB1 since Adrian Peterson has left. The rich man's Devonta Freeman this season. Not on him this week. He's the 5th highest tagged running back on Fanshare Sports with a 100% approval rating. Who's giving him that approval rating?
I mean, if
Not
I like him, he's going to be chalk of the week. I can guarantee you that.
All right. This is much more a case for Kamara than it is a critique on Ingram, but just hear me out on this. Mark Ingram fumbled twice last week after fumbling 2 weeks prior. After his second fumble, Kamara came in and got the final 3 running back carries in the game. In weeks 7 and 8 of last season, he had fumbles in 2 consecutive games. And then he got benched for Tim Hightower, who is terrible and not in the league anymore. From week 8 until the end of that season, Ingram saw only 5 carries more than Hightower, despite outgaining him by 248. That's a 6.0 yards per carry average to 4.0. We've seen coaches, specifically this one, do stupid things before to punish a guy. I'm loading up on Kamara. I'm bumping up Breeze slightly because of it. The matchup is also better for Kamara. Tampa Bay is a pass funnel defense, ranking 11th best in opposing yards per carry, but 5th worst in opposing passer rating. Breeze should be throwing more anyway, and Kamara is kind of used like a wide receiver anyway. He's lining up as a wide receiver 42% of the time. That's the highest rate among running backs. Again, he is expensive relative to current usage, but I'm I'm shifting ownership based on what I perceive as legitimate risk that he sees a reduced workload this week. Could be wrong, but
Willie Snead best ball shares basically rendered useless thanks to Kamara lining up at receiver so often. So
Right.
a pretty strong take from Scott on that. I don't know. I might have to reevaluate a little bit. I think Ingram going to be one of the higher owned players of the week.
To be honest, I don't feel super confident in it. I just haven't heard anyone else really talk about it. So just
100% approval rating. What can go wrong?
Right. So just based on that kind of ownership, I'll go a little contrarian.
And I think Tyler, I think this is a little bit of a hot take. You got Chris Thompson. I just saw Kevin Ross' weather report just popped up for this Seattle game too. So it's going to be like mid 40s, on and off showers with wind going on in this game. There's no Jordan Reed. It looks like Jamison Crowder's not going to play. We just saw Houston destroy the Seattle defense here. I think a lot of people are going to be looking at Thompson. He's clearly the best running back because they need to pass the ball every play. Why the fade on Thompson this week?
I'm not really as strongly opinionated here as Scott was on his Alvin Kamara. In fact, I'll be one of those people in that fan share with 100% yes, because I love Mark Ingram. 26.7 touches since Adrian Peterson left. That's great volume. I'm going with the Mark Ingram side. But back to Thompson. He's going against a Seahawks defense that is allowing the fewest receptions and fewest receiving yards to opposing backfields so far this year. What's really imposing is Bobby Wagner in coverage. He's our number 1 graded coverage linebacker this year. He's also our number 1 run stopper among all inside linebackers.
Sounds like a good player.
Yeah, he's a very good player. And as such, I'm not really that interested in Thompson. Like Alvin Kamara, I think both these receiving backs are priced at their absolute ceilings. They're going to need touchdowns to justify their salaries. I don't want to play Thompson at all this week.
So a couple, I think a little hot takes on the duds. I like it when you guys spice it up a little bit. Players that will be owned, you give some good reasoning why you don't want to use them. So with running back out of the way, this is where we screen share some of the cool stuff that Pro Football Focus has behind the paywall. Maybe even some more of these dank stats Scott comes up with be behind the paywall soon enough. But Scott, I want to start with you on your actual opportunity. It's kind of your baby. You've put a lot of work into it here. I've got it pulled up here. With the actual opportunity, PPRs, the differences in here. So if the guys missed us last week talking about it, talk about what goes on in the sheet, and then maybe one or two of the players playing this week that you've highlighted.
Right. So basically, we're looking at a 10-season sample size of every single target and every single carry. We're looking at every target by depth of target and distance from the end zone, every carry by down in distance and distance from the end zone. So obviously a carry on the 1 yard line is worth far more than a carry on the 50-yard line. Deep targets worth more than short and intermediate targets. Targets in the end zone, near the end zone, worth more than targets farther away. So we factor all that in, add it together, every single carry, every single target, and assign a value to each player that's describing the value of their role for fantasy purposes in terms of the volume they're seeing, but also the expectation. So it's like contrasting it to what the average player would do. So we can see how efficient a certain player is, how many fantasy points they should be scoring. I looked at a number of players this week. We talked about, well, here's a guy. So, oh no, I'm talking about him later. Never mind.
Dude, I think all these guys we're talking about later.
Yeah. Like I said, this is my baby. I put a ton of work into it. Like a lot of these guys, one name I will point out is Marvin Jones, who I'm not talking about. So over his past 2 games, he leads in yards in air, targets, red zone targets, end zone targets, deep targets, totaling 58.2 expected fantasy points. That's most among all wide receivers. That is absurd volume. I get this is due to Golden Tate only playing 59% of the snaps due to injury. I get these were 2 straight blowout losses. The matchup's amazing. I don't need to go too in depth into that. But even with a healthier Golden Tate, if I'm playing that Monday night slate, I am going to have exposure to Marvin Jones just because of that absurd volume at a low salary.
Yeah, it's nice to talk about him on the Thursday slate because you can play him on these games. And we'll talk about another player too, possibly in Devontae Parker, who's also available on the Thursday slate, who looks like he's in a pretty good spot here. Tyler, I want to talk to you. This is kind of new to PFF this year, but it's the what do you guys call this? The O-line, you guys do wide receiver, cornerback. You started doing tight end, linebacker. This is the O-line, D-line. It breaks in a whole bunch of run blocking, pass blocking from both offense and defense, and breaks it down really quickly to see which lines have the best running and best passing advantage. Anything stand out for you this week?
Yeah, this is brand new to the site. It's its first year on the website. One thing that does stand out to me is the immediate Jets versus Buffalo. The Jets have a terrible matchup on paper against the Bills' run defense. A lot of that does factor in Marcel Darius's play, who is now with the Jaguars. But I still think it stands to reason that the Jets will have a difficult time running against the Bills. As far as a pass play for us to take advantage of, the Jaguars should have little difficulty playing against the Bengals. They have the biggest mismatch there. The Jaguars defense, I think they're first in QB sacks.
I fear for Andy Dalton's career. I fear for Andy Dalton's career in this game.
He could land awkwardly, and it could be a rough outing for the rest of the season for Bengals fans.
Yeah, so check these out. We always do wide receiver, cornerback, and we'll talk about receivers in a minute. But I want to point this out. This is new this year. They also added tight ends slash coverage linebackers to give you an idea of that kind of next level stuff you don't really see anywhere else. So I want to talk about that. And then snaps and pace. I don't know who wants to talk about this here. I talk about this every week. It's something I always look at. I like to see the games that are going to be slow, possibly, because these are games I probably want to avoid. Bengals, Jacksonville, not too interested in that. Oakland, Miami, slightly interesting because I do like Devontae Parker. Falcons, Panthers, I think a lot of people might think that's going to be a fast-paced game. Scott, any takes on Falcons, Panthers?
I think both guys could be contrarian, and a lot of people have pointed out Sarkisian maybe isn't as terrible as people are talking about. Really, a lot of the numbers are the same except for
just big plays and touchdowns.
Yeah, right.
And kind of important.
Cam Newton is rushing a ton. He still has that crazy high tournament ceiling, although very inconsistent. Remember the wins from last week that could have played an issue. But yeah, Pat Thorman does amazing work with this. Any DFS player needs to read this every single week. He highlighted Washington at Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
Russell Wilson or Darrell Bevel, so the offensive play caller for the Seahawks, he hit a 10-year career 10-year high in passing games per play, passing plays per game last season, and plays per game last season, and he's hitting a new 10-season high this year. Volume's up, pace is up, so maybe there's reason to like Russell Wilson again this week.
No way. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the league. They get a new offensive tackle too. Maybe that helps, gives him an extra 1/10 of a second every once in a while with a clean pocket. I think that's a pretty good spot. These are all things I look at on PFF just about every week. I love Scott's article, Pat's article. Tyler, I'm sure you write some good stuff, but we can only talk about so much. We got to keep moving on here. So let's go to receivers. It's going to end the screen share. And I guess I'll start with you, Scott. You, me, my grandma, my dog, we're all playing Dez Bryant on DraftKings this week. I don't know why he's so cheap, but I think he's in contention with probably Jack Doyle as one of the highest owned players of the week on DraftKings.
He ranks 5th among all receivers in expected fantasy points per game, 5th in target market share, 4th in air yardage market share, 1st among all wide receivers in end zone targets inside the 5-yard line, 10-yard line, and 20-yard lines per game. Efficiency has been poor, but anyone who's been listening to this podcast knows exactly why that's the case. Very cornerback sensitive, very tough cornerback schedule throughout the season.
Mm-hmm.
He's in a very strong matchup this week. Again, Ezekiel Elliott is not in the lineup. He's against the Kansas City defense, allowing the most fantasy points per game to opposing outside wide receivers. More specifically, they're allowing the most fantasy points per game to opposing left wide receivers after allowing the second most last season as well. That's where Dez Bryant runs 47% of his routes. Kansas City is also allowing the most fantasy points per game to receivers on intermediate and deep throws. This bodes well for Bryant, who leads his team in average depth of target with 12.0, while, believe it or not, Cole Beasley ranks 2nd with just 8.9. 11th highest priced wide receiver on DraftKings, 8th highest priced wide receiver on FanDuel. That's dumb. He should be chalk for a reason.
Yeah, I think he's pretty good. In Kansas City, too, they were trying to switch up cornerbacks. They've been getting burned so much. So I still don't even think that's going to work here. So Des Bryant easily, he's going to vie for one of the highest owned players on DraftKings this week. Another guy I think on FanDuel is going to garner pretty high ownership, Tyler, and I'm even trying to use him on DraftKings. It's Michael Thomas. We talked about Drew Brees in the passing game. Scott doesn't like Mark Ingram. That bodes well for Alvin Kamara in the passing game. Tampa Bay stinks against the pass here. Pretty easy to use Thomas this week.
Yeah, I couldn't agree. I'm doubling down here with my best quarterback and my best wide receiver, guys. We have yet to see the monster fantasy blow up game with this stack, and I'm anticipating it coming almost any week now. Thomas should run the majority of his routes against Robert McClain, who has allowed 21 of 27 targets against to be caught. He's barely putting up a fight out there and ranks as our number 106 cornerback out of 114 qualifying. We already mentioned Brent Grimes will likely be out. Just more opportunities for Thomas to pick up tons of fantasy yards against backup cornerbacks. Tampa Bay is allowing the third most receptions, fourth most receiving yards, and the third most DraftKings points to opposing wideouts. Breeze at home. Let's go.
Also, Tampa Bay, let me find this up. I did some research myself this week. 31st pass DVOA, 27th in DVOA against the team's top receiver. What is not to like? Brent Grimes out. Play Michael Thomas, guys. Don't try to get too cute here. Let's talk value. Again, this relates to if you're playing the primetime slates or if you're playing the Thursday night slate. Jay Cutler's back slinging the football deep, Scott, and we want to jump back on Devontae Parker at low ownership here. Give me some dang stats.
Yeah, so before his week 5 injury, Parker ranked 8th among wide receivers in expected fantasy points per game, 14th in actual fantasy points per game, 8th in targets per game, 2nd in air yards per game, and 1st in deep targets per game. The latter two statistics are most important to me. Yards in air, deep targets. Oakland is allowing the 5th most fantasy points per game to receivers on deep passes. Parker projects to run 43% of his routes lined up against David Amerson and 34% of his routes lined up against Sean Smith. Why is that significant? I'm glad you asked. Among all 210 defenders targeted at least 15 times this season, Amerson is allowing a 30-plus yard play on 14.2% of his targets. That's the highest rate in the league. Sean Smith is allowing a 50-plus yard play on 12.5% of his targets, the highest rate in the league. And this isn't just a one-season outlier. Last season, Amerson led all defenders in plays surrendered of 30 or more yards, 9, while Smith ranked 2nd in plays surrendered of at least 40 yards, 5. If he's healthy, with Jay Cutler back under center and workhorse running back Jay Ajayi now to the picture, Parker is going to lose his mind on Monday night, right? Is it Sunday night? The 27th highest priced wide receiver on FanDuel. That is stupid.
Yeah, I think it's a really great spot. We saw Jay Cutler have really good chemistry with him in the preseason, had it for the first couple of weeks here. Nobody's going to be thinking about this, in my opinion. Those deep stats numbers are out of this world here, so keep your eye on Parker. I'm trying to get more tournament shares for sure this week. We talked a little bit about Marvin Jones. Tyler, what do you got for me? He's getting all these targets every single week, a little bit of it with Golden Tate here. But his matchup, at least most of the time here, looks pretty promising against a certain Packers cornerback.
Yeah, he's been a complete target hog lately, seeing 25 targets over the last 2 games. He scored 21 fantasy points in back-to-back outings, and I'm rolling the dice here for a third. I really like this matchup here against the Packers secondary. Marvin Jones runs 88% of his routes on the outside, which means he'll draw a lot of Devon House when lining up on the right and Kevin King on the left. The Packers play pretty stationary as far as where their cornerbacks line up. House has been balling, though. He's limiting receivers to a 38% catch rate and a QB rating of just 40.2 when targeted against. King, on the other hand, he's been tested heavily as a rookie. King has played the same number of snaps and pass coverage as House. However, King has over twice the amount of targets against, yielding a 109.5 QB rating in coverage. When Marvin Jones lines up against King, that's where I'm expecting him to have some big plays this week. And he should do it a decent amount this week.
Yeah, I think Marvin Jones, again, another guy everyone knows. This week receiver, there's T.Y. Hilton, too, he's so cheap on DraftKings. I think he's interesting for value. You've got Devin Funchess in the mix as well. I think those are going to be pretty popular guys. You guys have people a little bit off the board, and I like that on the value plays this week. Scott, I've heard people playing Sammy Watkins this week here. So why don't you like him? It's just he really hasn't produced, doesn't seem to be clicking here. You don't seem to want to use him this week, though.
Yeah, right. Like I said, I get the appeal. He's up against a Giants defense without Janoris Jenkins. has had a brutal cornerback schedule the past 3 weeks against Seattle, Jacksonville, and Arizona. But that being said, he ranks 3rd among the wide receivers on his team and 67th among all wide receivers in expected fantasy points per game. Based on that kind of volume, I just can't play him this week.
And your dud, Tyler, AJ Green, I own him on my season-long fantasy week. I'm still playing him because my other options are like, I don't even know, like Jermaine Kearse or something tonight. So I'm going to play AJ Green over Jermaine Kearse. But you just can't. We didn't like Andy Dalton. We want to use the Jacksonville defense. These outside cornerbacks, they're just too good for Jacksonville.
Yeah, this is just a layup here. Both Jalen Ramsey and AJ Boye ranked top 10 among all cornerbacks. Both allow a QB rating of just 41 when targeted against. Dalton's not going to have any time to throw. I don't think AJ Green's going to have time to run his deep to intermediate routes. And good luck, Dalton. Good luck, AJ Green. I don't think it's going to pay off this week.
Yeah. So don't play AJ Green. If he wins the Millionaire Maker at like 2% owned, probably even less than that, so be it. We'll take our L's, right?
Yeah.
Let's go to tight end. Close this out. Scott, we've got some studs. There's a lot of good tight ends in my opinion this week here. So I don't know. I can't argue with anybody's tight ends here. So you've got Zach Ertz going up against Denver. You already said they're probably going to run empty routes on the outside. Leaves Zach Ertz, who's basically otherworldly right now in tight end for production. Tyler's going to talk about Travis Kelce, who I also like. There's a lot of good value. Why should I spend up on Ertz?
Right. Kelce is definitely a great play. So Ertz is just crazy productive. He has at least 80 yards or a touchdown in 12 of his last 13 games. Over his last 16 games, he ranks 4th among all receivers in receptions, 13th in yards, 5th in touchdowns, 5th in fantasy points. He's coming off of a tough matchup against the 49ers to face a Denver defense giving up the 4th most fantasy points per game against expectation to opposing tight ends. And this is really how you attack Denver. They're still great against wide receivers. Now they're best in the league against running backs. 34.8% of their receiving fantasy points allowed this season is going to tight ends. 29.2% of the receiving fantasy points allowed went to tight ends last season. That was the highest rate in both seasons the past two years.
Yeah, so I love Ertz this week. I think it's good if you have the money, a little bit of a GPP swerve. Tough to use them in cash. It's always tough to use high tight ends when you want to get expensive other skill position players that can really win you the week. And there's a couple value tight ends I really like, but I can definitely get behind Ertz pretty easily. The other guy is Travis Kelce. Tyler, he's another guy. He's huge, a complete mismatch this week for the Dallas defense.
Yeah, flip a coin. You can get exposure to both Ertz and Kelce at almost the exact same price. Man, imagine Ertz in December this year, guys. Like, he's crushing it right now, and we're only a month away from December.
3 touchdowns every week in December.
I can't wait. I love Kelce, though. I think he's also another great play. Our good friend Graham Barfield tweeted this out earlier this week. Kelce leads the league in 100-yard outings among all receivers over the past 2 years, tight ends and wide receivers. He owns a 22.7% target market share of the Chiefs' offense. That's higher than some number 1 wide receivers on teams. He leads all Chiefs in red zone targets, red zone touchdowns. I'm not letting the defensive stats against Dallas so far this year sway me from going away from Kelce. I think this is an absolute blow-up spot where they're going to rely on their best receiving weapon in order to keep pace in what's projected to be a shootout.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good. I'm looking over on Sharp Football as a kind of a site. Warren does the Friday night show here. One of the kind of the newest big names, I think, to enter DFS. Looking at the success rates against tight end. So we've got Dallas 22nd in success rate, so pretty successful using tight ends there. Denver 25th. That's a pretty good success rate. So teams know to target them with tight ends. And anything you can do over on Sharp Football too is really good stuff. Warren provides pretty good content over there. So let's get to value. And you might think it's chasing, but 1, he's not expensive enough. And 2, he's getting like a bajillion targets a game here. I don't know if the pass happy game script's going to be as much as we thought it was going to be with Deshaun Watson out now. But I'm playing Jack Doyle because Jack Doyle rules, Scott.
Right. I feel like that meme from like 2013 or whatever. Jack Doyle's price is too damn low. I think I wrote him up last week. I'm not sure. I did in a few spots.
I used him in cash everywhere last week, and it was just like that won me the week.
Printing money.
Right. So he leads his team. He ranks 4th among tight ends in expected fantasy points per game. Don't expect that to change too much moving forward, despite recent comments about wanting to get T.Y. Hilton the ball more. So across his 2 seasons in the NFL, including preseason, Jacoby Brissett has targeted tight ends on 27.4% of his attempts, while the league average rate hovers around 19%. That was true in his final year of college as well, when his leading receiver was tight end Jalen Samuels, who had 31 more receptions than the next closest receiver, as well as 4 more receiving touchdowns. Texans are allowing the 7th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. He's the 11th highest priced tight end. Again, compare that to his 4th highest expected fantasy point total. Just way too cheap not to play him. It's not chasing points.
He's getting the volume of Ertz, 39 targets over the past 4 weeks. Texans just gave up 2 TDs to Jimmy Graham. Now Jimmy Graham's probably a better tight end with a better quarterback, but I think Doyle, I don't know, 7 catches, 80 yards, a touchdown seems pretty easy for him this week, in my opinion. Tyler, you wanted to talk about Jack Doyle too, but you lost the arm wrestling match for that. So let's talk about somebody else.
All right. I like Jimmy Graham as well. Washington is allowing the most receiving yards and 4th most fantasy points on DraftKings to opposing tight ends. Graham has 4 touchdowns over his last 3 games. That number honestly should be higher. He missed out on some other opportunities where he could have had a lot more fantasy points and bigger outings. I'm going to ride the hot hand here. He's just $5K on DraftKings. I think that's priced way too low. I think he's a great cash game play. I think he's a great tournament play. Honestly, he's a good flex play if you want to try to mix things up and go double tight end.
Yeah, if you're struggling on DK, if you're trying to squeeze every ounce of value, I think Jimmy Graham and Jack Doyle, not a crazy situation to use both of those this week. Washington as well, success rate, 55% of plays against Washington, the tight ends are successful. And why? Because Josh Norman and Breeland, all these guys on the outside, they're the 2nd toughest success rate on the outside. So you pick them apart on the inside. I think Graham's in store for a pretty good week. This is a little hot takey, I think, Scott, here. You don't want to use Vernon Davis. So we just saw, well, we didn't just see, but there's basically nobody else to catch passes in Washington. Crowder's not going to play, I don't think. Jordan Reed, he hurt his leg on a wet field, and I think it's going to be another wet field this week. So they're probably not going to run him out, even if he's questionable or whatever. I think they're going to sit him. Davis, he's basically the only healthy option, probably going to be running a ton of routes. Why don't you like him?
Right. I just wanted to commend Tyler on that Jimmy Graham take. That's another good call. He leads all players and targets inside the 10 and 20 yard lines per game. Also, Washington's allowing the 2nd most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends for the past 2 seasons. With Vernon Davis, it's just relative to projected ownership, which looks to be very high. I don't think he's as great of a play as everyone is making it out to be. If you look at the 5 games Reed has missed over the past 2 seasons, Davis is averaging just 8.6 expected fantasy points per game, so really not a lot of volume. That would rank 15th among tight ends this season, which is about where he's priced. Granted, he is fairly efficient, and like you said, the receiving core is a little worse. So I just temper expectations for Vernon Davis this week.
A couple things. There is no Earl Thomas. Does that change anything? He looks extremely questionable to play, but also, again, I'm looking at the success rate against tight ends. You know which team is the toughest to have a successful play against tight ends? That would be Seattle. They're at home this week. How do you weigh those two out? Earl Thomas, pretty good defender against tight ends here. Does that do anything for you?
Let me check and see his target totals against tight ends this year.
So we'll get back to you. We'll close out with that here. Your dud, Tyler. I can't. If there was a guy named Britt, now if Kenny Britt played, I would have to tout him every single week here. So why do you not want to play Tyler Kroft? This seems like something completely ridiculous that you don't want to play a guy with the same first name as you.
No, I'd rather chase another ginger over Tyler Kroft.
Andy Dalton.
Well, I'll go Carson Wentz this week instead. Okay. I'm going to fade Tyler Kroft. I don't really have any interest in playing him whatsoever. He's running a route on just 47.8% of his snaps. Ideally, we'd like our tight ends to get near that 50% plus range. Some of them, like top 5 fantasy tight ends, are near that 60% plus range. So being sub 50 is not optimal. Tyler Kroft had just 1 game over 50 receiving yards so far this year. I'm not really chasing the touchdown potential here in a game where it has the lowest implied score of the week at just 16.75 points. He's gonna need to block against these defensive ends the Jaguars rolling out.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. All that stuff. I fear for Andy Dalton's life this week. This Jacksonville defense. If you have the money, spend up on them. Scott, did you come up with anything? Earl Thomas, does this do anything for you?
Yeah, the data suggests he doesn't primarily cover the tight end for Seattle, so maybe a slight upgrade, but not too much.
All right, Tyler, real quick, any other player we didn't talk about this week that you might have a take on?
Julio Jones. I kind of really want to play some Julio. He's been very inconsistent with Steve Sarkisian, but he's priced under 8K. That's the lowest he's been priced since week 16 of 2014.
All right, so guys, thanks for watching the Pro Football Focus Show. We had some really good stats, dank stats, hashtag from Mr. Scott Barrett. So we're going to get on out of here. Thanks to Scott and Tyler for showing up. I'm Britt, and we out ya.